All right. I'm going to welcome up to the stage first our moderators. Please join me in welcoming Grace Young Foster, founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. Welcome our co-moderator, Ariana Shimon. Welcome our first panelist, Hoang Murphy, CEO of People Serving People, and founder and former CEO of Foster Advocates. He is a foster. Welcome Osahon Akpata-Tanious, Executive Director at Foster Advocates. She is a foster. Please join me in welcoming Elliott, Orrin, Hinkle, consultant, facilitator, trainer, speaker, advisor, and national expert. They are a foster as well. And last but not least, join me in welcoming Anthony Walsh, author, athlete, politician, and community engagement specialist for Hennepin County. He's an adoptee.
We've had a couple conversations about language that we use when we talk about our community of people who experience foster care. And there's a lot of different terms that go around to describe who we are, especially when we age out of the system, right? We're no longer foster youth. There's several terms, but we talked about the importance of the term fosters and why that's meaningful. And you helped really shape that and bring that to light for our community. Curious what you want to share about why that language is important.
In founding Foster Advocates in 2018, one of the hardest parts of it for me was just, where do we start? When I reach out to someone, what do I refer to them as? And, it's really where thinking about, the disability space, thinking about being an Asian American, that's where, really, it was really important that we start to identify and find those terms. Asian is a political identity. It's one that we choose here because we realized that there needed to be more of us to resist the violence that was happening to our communities. That then we organized, we then became Asian. The disability space did the same thing, that they recognized that, in a perfect world, we would be seen as more than the things that happened to us. But the reality is that these things did, and it creates identity. We don't get to choose not to be. It doesn't, just wash off. It leaves a mark, and one that we can sit with, but one that it is critically important that is neutral. The things that I am not, I'm not a foster alum. And the reason for that is because I didn't choose to be. Foster is neutral. Foster is identifying, just like adoptee, right? It doesn't acknowledge the complexity of it, but it doesn't try to assign a positivity that doesn't belong either. But also, to build a movement, we have to call ourselves something. We have to identify as something. And we are fosters. And I would encourage folks to use that term as well.
So my question for you all is, why are you all leaders in this space, in this social impact space?
So my initial thought was to self-proclaim myself as a leader is very interesting, but at the same time, the work that we are doing, and now we're sitting in front of our community, kind of designates us as leaders, by, acclamation in that sense. But we don't speak for everybody. And that's a beautiful thing about being in a room like this. I think that every story in this room is going to be different, but it all ties back into foster or adoptee. So I think that by speaking out about our stories and by normalizing maybe some of the mystique behind it gives us that opportunity to present ourselves as leaders. But I think everybody in this room is a leader, has that opportunity, and I would love to get a chance to hear everybody's story as well.
I think for me, I do this work especially because I wasn't seeing a lot of myself represented in leadership. And I think in this current time period that we're in our country, people are fairly afraid to be out in themselves. It's pretty risky. Experienced hate mail and doxing and death threats just for speaking up and standing up for our community. So for me, it feels important to be in these spaces and to do this work because I also don't think it's just going to happen. People have to actually do something about it, whether that's organizing, speaking, whatever it is. And so I think for me, the experience I had in care continues to drive the work I try to do as an adult to make sure that young people in care now have better experiences or ideally don't touch systems at all. So that keeps me going, knowing that I want to have an impact that's felt.
If there's a call to action, I'm going to answer. I think the complexity of what I bring to who I am and what has shaped who I am can help me lead and pull different segments from others and let them know that they have power and a voice at the table. So yeah, I just answered the call to action. And I think that's why I'm here, and being myself authentically and everything that comes with that. I hope it inspires others people to make up a lot of space in rooms where they're not expected to take up space and make everyone else uncomfortable, because That's their problem. Like, if you're called to be there, like, and everything that comes with that.
We talk a lot as a society about transforming the systems and systems change and systems work. And so, what are your thoughts around this systems change work versus the grassroots?
I think for me, living my state was really important to become myself and to have safety to do that. And I also wanted to do more work that wasn't determined by the system. I think a lot of the federal technical assistance I did was still under any administration limited by whatever that administration had or sensitivities around politics. And so there wasn't always the boldness that was necessary to name the issues and actually address them. So if I'm talking to parents of trans kids and they're navigating something today, I have a better understanding of what's happening for them right now than what a system says or a few years from now says a policy might do. I think all of it's important together, but I think I don't want to do my work based on the system anymore because I don't think the system works anyways. It works how it's supposed to harm people.
I think right now we're all noticing how systems are structured, federal landscape. It's really easy to kind of manipulate them however the person in power sees fit. And that's a structural issue. And pulling back to the initial question, right? It's part of the identity component. So how do we coalesce fosters around that? So we have several fosters who, before meeting foster advocates and getting to know foster advocates, they didn't really have an identity for themselves. But like, what does it look like to have being a foster be something that I can organize around, have that as the central point of systems change? So I don't think it's a either or. I really don't think it's a versus. I think it's very much combined. It's like the systems change is being driven by the movement building and the grassroots approach and how we pull in fosters who may not necessarily be within our organization on staff, but how they can help dictate some of the steps that we make.
I don't think it's either or. The way you make the system change is you start with the grassroots. You start with organizing fosters. FA was able to pass a free college for fosters over the age of 13 here in the state because that's what fosters said we needed to do. If you were ever in foster care, even for a day in the state of Minnesota, on or past your 13th birthday, it is a full ride. It is not, tuition waiver. It is the whole thing because that's what fosters said that they needed for it to be real. Whether it was 50 grand or 10 grand, it was going to be impossible. And so we needed to close that gap. And it starts by organizing folks who have the direct impact because they're also the experts.
For myself, I think about system change. And when Philando Castile was murdered in Falcon Heights and nothing was done about that, I was very heavily affected. Then I had moved away from Minnesota. I was spending time in Washington, D.C. When I was living in D.C., I saw George Floyd be murdered like everybody else did online. And being from Minneapolis, I thought to myself, what can I do? I was in the streets of Washington, D.C. I did a lot of marching. And to be honest, I just felt like I needed to do more and really thought, well, how are we going to change things? So grassroots versus system change. The system really hadn't changed. And so I thought maybe developing grassroots organizations and helping youth in particular build confidence was something that needed to be done. So having done all that, build a few organizations, stuff like that, you still realize that unfortunately, you need people in positions of power that can pull the lever for the people that are actually voting for them and not big money interests that are bringing these people into office. And so for myself, I did end up running and, that was a great experience. And looking at all of what happened there, I ran as an independent, against the big interests of corporations and parties. Ultimately, I think we need more people in those positions that are able to create laws and pass policies like we have for fosters and adoptees, changing the Child Family Preservation Act in Minnesota, like things like that are done by people that have the experience that are in these systems that then can create that change. And so I think it's really important for us in these positions to be able to step up and to build ourselves and to go forth for the people that aren't able to maybe at this moment speak for themselves due to the situation that they're in.
We've all been talking about this a little bit. Now that we're talking about the importance of grassroots, of weakening the walls a little bit, how we can. We're talking about systems change and how hard that work is as well. How do we build these bridges together?
I think I'll just start with, understanding and respecting the nuance of each space, right? I guess one of my concerns would be being a foster. You now think you know all of what it means to be an adopt. Understanding and respecting that there is some overlap, but there's some nuance in respecting the nuance of each. So I think for me, it's like realizing that there are some overlaps, but there are not, and that's okay. Because even within the foster identity, we're not a monolith. The way we walk, the way we talk, what we've gone through, how the system impacted us, how we impacted the system back, it's all different. In my story, there is some complexity with immigration, and that's a lever I can pull on to be able to empathize with an adoptee. But I think I'm going to continue to honor the space that adoptees hold, and I honor and respect the steps that you have to make to change some of the rooms that you walk into.
I think that we're not very unified right now. I think the foster and adoptee space, it's not opposing, but I mean foster efforts in the country are not super unified. There isn't a central place where we come together and we've coalesced on these are the issues we're fighting for, the things we want to change. And so I think there's something to be said for what needs to happen there. And my hope would be that it would come from us and not from the system, and not from just a funder directing it, but that we really have ownership. And I think foster advocates is a great example of what that can look like.
Bridge building is always a difficult one. And I'll pose it, and this is kind of rhetorical, but if anybody does know the answer, shout it out. Who out of our presidents was an adoptee? Yes, 100%. 100%. Gerald Ford, Simone Biles, Larry Ellison, Steve Jobs, Marilyn Monroe. The list goes on and on. We know so many of these people that are in our popular culture whose stories involve adoption and foster. And so I think that bridge building is also elevating those stories when we're talking about these people, because we are full human beings. A lot of times you have to see it to believe it. And so a lot of times if we don't know that these people have that in their backgrounds, or watching them accomplish these great things without knowing also that deep personal struggle that came with that a lot of us also do know as well. And so when bridge building, I think that's important for all of us in these rooms that we're in, to, as we elevate and as we continue to be successful, to not shy away from that aspect of our life and our story, because it's very powerful, and it's really important that people understand that.
So you all are talking about and leading us to our next question, which I have a lot of thoughts about, and I'm really excited to hear from you all. I have this opportunity to work with fosters, young fosters all over the state, and a lot of them want to change the system. They want to change what happened to them and make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. And a lot of them believe to change or to be a part of that change, they have to go into child welfare. There's so many different roles that you can play, right? And we're trying to build bridges, and it's not that easy. So in what ways do you think we can mobilize better together?
One of the hard things about foster care, about being an adoptee and being marginalized in these ways, is that it limits our imagination. I think if you can imagine it, right? But that's one of the first things that gets captured, is that we can't imagine better for ourselves and for our community. So what I would encourage people to do is look to history, right? They want to tell us that we don't have common interest, right? And to that, I look to history. I look to the spirits of, Yuri Kochiyama. I look to Grace Lee Boggs. Yuri was there when Malcolm X died. And so people are always raising up their hand to ask, well, why didn't you show up for me? Well, the best way to get people to show up for you is you show up for them first.
I don't think it's a role for everyone, but I have found it's been really important for me to sit with people that think very differently than me in fairly uncomfortable ways as well, that, don't agree with my existence or whatever. But I'm not necessarily usually there because I think I'm going to change their mind, but I'm trying to understand how they got there. And so I think one aspect of some of this work is really sitting with people who might make us uncomfortable or think very differently than us, if we want to get closer to solidarity, because we also want to be heard as well.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on trying to understand people that walk a different path than you. I think for the allies in the audience, I think that's who I want to speak to. If there's adoptees and fosters in your space, just allowing them to tell you their story rather than looking at the stats and ascribing, well, oh, you probably have PTSD, so let me give you these accommodations. Actually let them unfold their story to you. I think for me, sometimes I've had mentors, white cisgender mentors, who have been forced to be my mentor, starting from a lens of being anti-DEI to now identifying as Black feminists, because they realize all the complexity that it takes for me to be in certain rooms. And they did the research on their own, and figured out, oh yeah, inclusion's important.
I think that also mentioning finding space outside of our identities as foster and adoptees. And so one thing I really kind of focus on, I try to focus on, because you're talking about child welfare, Grace, and that just, I think child welfare has a negative connotation to it. Reframing it to something like getting kids to be part of like different groups. And so just for myself personally, it was youth sports. I think other people, it can be chess club, it can be book clubs, it can be debate, right? All that kind of stuff. But helping people find something that is of their identity, I think is really important.
Thank you so much for being here. You all are incredible leaders. You are incredible colleagues of mine. And I just really appreciate you doing the work that you do, but just being in community with us and sharing of yourselves like this. So thank you so much.